Good morning, Miami. It is the 34th annual book fair. Let's give the book fair a round of applause. My name is Pascal Charlot. I am the Dean of the Honors College here at Miami-Dade College, and it is an absolute pleasure to have the chance to share today with you. We are so fortunate in our community to have this extraordinary event, but it would not be possible without sponsors like the Knight Foundation, OHL Orlando, the Bachelor Foundation, and of course the DeGroote Foundation. Let's give them a round of applause. And these acknowledgments would not be complete unless we recognize all the friends of the fair, which are here in this room right now. Please give yourselves a round of applause. As you know, the day is filled with a series of extraordinary authors, and we have a pretty tight schedule. So I'm going to ask a couple of things of you. First and foremost, please turn off your cell phones. If you would, just take a moment and just leave them off for the rest of the day. Let your brain soar. Secondly, I will ask that when we have Q&A, we will be asking you to line up behind the microphone. As mentioned, we have a fairly tight schedule, so when it appears as if we're running out of time, I will appear. So please note, it's not personal, but it is limited based on our time schedule. And of course, the room will be switching over, so at the time that the program is over, you can exit. The book signing author area is in the green area to the right of the restroom, should you wish to have your book signed. At this point, I have the wonderful pleasure of welcoming our very own local hero, Jim DeFede, host of Facing South Florida. Thank
you. Good morning. You can respond, good morning. That's it, get the blood pumping. This is a Sunday, so little revival church. All right, I have the honor of introducing Charlie Sykes. Charlie was born in Seattle, grew up in New York, and for some reason decided to settle in Wisconsin. Maybe the weather in South Florida will convince him to relocate down here. He once ran for office as a pro-life Democrat, but lost, but yet set some sort of really a bar and it was a revolutionary race that I think redefined a lot of things in Wisconsin. Now, he's also a journalist by background. He covered the Milwaukee City Hall for the Milwaukee Journal and moved on to become the editor-in-chief of Milwaukee Magazine. Most folks, however, know him today for his stints on MSNBC, but before that, of course, he was a powerhouse radio host in Wisconsin, hosting a conservative talk radio show for 13 years that was highly influential and did a great deal. It was basically, if you wanted to win office in Wisconsin, you came through Charlie Sykes' grills. All right, he also became famous as a never-Trumper. And of course, his book today is How the Right Lost Its Mind, and I'm going to kindly suggest that there's a follow-up book in it, and the title would be, And the Rest of Us Soon Followed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce Charlie Sykes.
Oh, yes, I think there are going to be follow-up books here. First of all, I want to thank the host of the Miami Book Fair for inviting me here today, and the folks from C-SPAN, too. Believe it or not, I don't want to spend most of my time talking about Donald Trump today. I want to talk about what Donald Trump is doing to us, including, well, we're all living through this together, right? I mean, 2017, damn. We have hurricanes, full eclipse of the sun, wildfires. Aaron Rodgers is injured. It's almost like the universe or God is trying to tell us that we did something wrong. I would suggest that if you ask yourself, what would Jesus do? The answer would not be elect Roy Moore to the Senate. But I may be in the minority among conservative Republicans on that issue. We're going to find out. So I want to start off, though, by just giving a little bit of background. I was a conservative talk show host for 23 years, and I thought I understood what the conservative movement was about. I thought I knew who conservatives were, and then along came Donald Trump. This is what I wrote, just to set the record straight. In August 2015, which was a few months after Donald Trump descended that golden escalator and announced that he was going to run for president. And I wrote, Donald Trump is a cartoon version of every media stereotype of the reactionary, nativist, misogynist right, except that he's not a cartoon. He's the leading GOP candidate for president at the moment. To be clear, Trump is not only a cynical opportunist, an incoherent ideologue, but a generally repellent human being. Even reading his tweets makes you dumber. Donald Trump is an onion-generated caricature of a real candidate, which makes his current faux success all the more baffling and troubling. So, point number one, Republicans were warned. And not just by me. People keep asking the question, well, what does Donald Trump have to do? What line does he have to cross for Republicans to break with him? And my answer is, whatever the line is, he's already crossed it. He's already broken the norm. This is not new. So in May of 2016, after Trump had successfully nailed down the Republican nomination, I was on Fox News. I believe this was the last time that I was on Fox News, which would mean it'll be the last time I will ever be on Fox News. And Megyn Kelly asked me the question, well, why are you not joining everybody else in the Republican Party and getting on board? And I said, Donald Trump is a serial liar, a con man who mocks the disabled and women. He's a narcissist and a bully, a man with no fixed principles, who has the vocabulary of an emotionally insecure 9-year-old. So, no, I don't want to give him control of the FBI, the IRS, and the nuclear codes. That's just me. All right. But my confession is that Donald Trump does not bother me as much as what he has done to us and to my fellow conservatives who, one after another, looked at him and said, okay, we can support him to be the president of the United States. And I've compared it to, and I borrowed this line from Jonah Goldberg from National Review, I've compared it to watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers. One after another, people who I knew did not disagree with me about my assessment, but decided that on our political era, in this political age, this moment they're in right now, that it was essential for them to get into line, to capitulate to him, to enable him, to rationalize his behavior, to defend the indefensible. So I am, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm horrified by a lot of what's happened, what the president does. And it is, yes, not surprising if you paid any attention to him in 2015 or 2016, what he's done as president. But it's still shocking to see it taking place from somebody with the mantle of power of the presidency of the United States. You know, in my one and only conversation with Donald Trump on the air, I actually said to him, I said, Mr. Trump, you are running for the office once held by Abraham Lincoln. You know, is this language appropriate? And of course, we know what the answer is. So what I want to do in my brief comments, then we're going to open it up to the questions, and what I try to do in the book is to take the focus off Trump, our obsessive focus on the Orange God King, which is so riveting, and to turn it around to us. How did we elect him president? How did the conservative movement go from William F. Buckley to Ann Coulter? How did we go from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump? How do you go from Edmund Burke to Sean Hannity? What happened to us? And of course, one of the key things when I started writing the book was to figure out what just happened to us. Was this a one-off? Was it a one-time thing? Was there something that we missed in the conservative movement? Did Donald Trump just parachute in and take over an otherwise healthy movement? Or was something else going on? And I concluded reluctantly, very reluctantly, that Donald Trump is not merely a cause. He certainly makes things worse, but he's also a symptom. And the dysfunction was a pre-existing condition, which will also not be covered by Republican health care plans. What we have also learned, and I think this is the shock that a lot of us are experiencing, and I have described it, and we, depending on our politics, we have different reactions. For me, 2015, 2016 was a soul-crushing, disillusioning slog, as I watched this happening. But I think it was also a shock to other folks who are realizing that this was something I think new in our politics, and it's a reminder of our fragility, that our system and our democracy is more fragile than we thought, that a lot of what we had taken for granted in terms of the democratic norms, things like, for example, checks and balances, that these turn out to be more metaphors than hard and fast rules, that our government and our system has really been based on an honor system, where the assumption was that the man or the woman in the Oval Office was a reasonably honorable person. And now we're tested finding out, well, what if that's not the case? How will we react as a democracy? We're also realizing, I hope, and I'm not going to try to be too dark here, that America, the United States of America, this shining city on a hill, this great last hope of humanity, is not in fact immune to history. That we in fact can squander our democracy. That we can take the path that other democracies have taken. That we are not necessarily entitled to simply go on by violating these norms. Because we're living through a period now that I don't think is going to be specifically defined by Donald Trump. And by that I mean, even after he leaves, the damage is going to remain because of what has happened to us and is happening and is accelerating. This rise of win-at-all-cost partisanship, this tribal identity, the post-truth society that we live in, our post-ethical society, our post-knowledge politics. Now, I argue in the book that one of the things, and I argue because it was, for me, one of the most troubling parts, was watching the repudiation of the conservative mind. All through 2016, we heard that this was an assault on the establishment or the elites. It was actually an assault on a lot of things. Yes, there is an establishment. Yes, there is an elite. But it was an assault on decency. It was an assault on traditions of thought, coherence, that we are still living through right now. Somebody asked me earlier today, so what about the conservative thought leaders? The people who actually care about some of these ideas. And my answer is, well, most of those are in exile. Most of them have been labeled cuck-servatives and have been excommunicated from the movement. One of the stories I tell in the book is about William F. Buckley Jr., the godfather of the modern conservative movement, who in the mid-1960s understood that if conservatism was ever going to be taken seriously, it had to clean its own house. It had to get rid of the bigots, the crackpots, the lunatics. It had to expel the John Birch Society. It had to make it clear that the Ku Klux Klan was beyond the pale. He didn't do that because he wasn't anti-communist or because he was a squish. He realized if you ever want to be taken seriously, you need to drain your own fever swamp, and was successful largely in pushing them to the margins. They obviously never went away, because when they made their comeback in 2016, we found there was no William F. Buckley Jr. who had the moral, intellectual, and political authority to say, stop, to expel you again. In fact, what we saw was the rise of these forces, the empowerment and the emboldening of folks that, I will confess, and you may think I am naive for this, I thought we had marginalized them. You always knew, that the angry drunk at the end of the bar was there, right? Your bigoted uncle at Thanksgiving, right? And the one you would say, hey, can we just turn on the television and just stop talking about politics? But it turns out that it was a huge mistake to ignore the existence of these folks, to push back. Now, I've tried to go back and look at the key moments, how and when this happened. And there's no definitive answer. I've had interesting conversations. Was it when Sarah Palin was nominated to be vice president? Was that a key moment? Or was it before that? Was it when Newt Gingrich weaponized politics back in the 1990s? Or was it before that? Was it when Richard Nixon adopted the Southern strategy? Was it more recently when the Drudge Report? By the way, how many people here are familiar with how important the Drudge Report is? Do you think so? Okay, the Drudge Report is basically a website that for many years was the assignment editor for much of the conservative media. Every conservative talk show host, every conservative media person, probably within the first hour of their day, would read the Drudge Report, which was just a series of links to various things. Sometime in the last 10 years, I was never able to identify the exact moment. Drudge began linking to Alex Jones from InfoWars. And Alex Jones, I can tell some of you are familiar, is not your garden variety conspiracy theorist. I mean, this is the dark, most toxic part of the paranoid fever swamps. 9/11 was an inside job, but so was Sandy Hook. That was staged. Almost, I mean, this is sick stuff. But he was injected into the mainstream, into the bloodstream of the conservative movement. If you want to know what happened with this explosion of fake news and propaganda, how was the immune system of the conservative movement destroyed, that was certainly one of them. You could go back to what happened with the Tea Party, which I have a somewhat complicated relationship with. But ultimately, the Tea Party morphed into this perpetual outrage machine that I think was taken over by grifters and charlatans, but also led the conservative movement into this place we are in now, where, and it's kind of, this is the shock of realization, that conservatives are not really that clear what they're for. They're very, very clear what they're against and who they hate. And to a certain extent, politics today, conservative politics can, and I will be, of course, criticized for this, but can be summed up in whatever makes liberals upset. As long as I piss off liberals, then it must be good. As long as I make liberals, their heads explode, then it must be good. No matter what that is, it is essentially a form of negative tribalism that is incredibly powerful and important to understand. The other thing that I think that we are going to have to grapple with is the rise of the alternative reality silos in our media. And this is a very difficult thing for me because I was part of the conservative right-wing media for 2 decades, but I thought, perhaps naively, that we were presenting a different point of view, not that we were creating an alternative reality. I knew that this was morphing into an echo chamber, but what we found in 2016 is these silos had become impenetrable, that information could not penetrate in, and that all kinds of bizarre, sick, and twisted stories would circulate and were impossible to refute. A lot of my year in 2016, which I recount in the book, was pushing back on people that I had known for 20 years. 20 years. And in the past, I'd be able to say, well, you know, that's a hoax. That's not true. Or here's the actual facts on this. And people would say, okay, hey, thank you, Charlie, for pointing that out. But in 2016, that changed with the explosion of Facebook, with the rise of the Breitbart media infrastructure. And I would point out, look, this is not true, and I'll send you a link to the Washington Post or the New York Times. And the response that I got increasingly was, oh, those liberal rags, they wouldn't believe anything outside the bubble. And that's the moment where you realize, oh my, we have succeeded in delegitimizing, not just criticizing the media, but delegitimizing all fact-based journalism. And I think that we have seen the consequences of that. And I think that the fact that the President of the United States is weaponizing that particular phenomenon is a real and present danger to our democratic discourse. So, for me, writing this book was a little bit cathartic because it's asking the question, as a conservative, who are we? What do we really believe in? What is really important to us? And what did we miss? What did we ignore? What were the failures to take the stand at the right moment? And I will be honest with you, that I'm still wrestling with all of this. We're still wrestling with the power of tribalism. And I don't think that we've actually plumbed the bottom of it yet. You know, if you ask the question, well, what do you mean? And by the way, you know, a lot of conservatives understand that there's an alternative reality. A lot of conservatives say that the title of my book is ridiculous. Because, I mean, how did the right lose its mind? Are you kidding me? We won the election. Well, it doesn't mean being crazy doesn't mean you don't win elections. But look, you know, we have a Supreme Court justice. We're about to get this just absolutely wonderful tax cut bill, all of these things. And my answer to, you know, how did the right lose its mind, if you want to know what's going on, I mean, look at Alabama right now. Look where we're going. And I'm going to wrap up, as I want to get to your questions in a moment. But you almost get the sense that even in the heart of Trump world, they realize that they cannot fully control all of the forces that they have unleashed. They've been nourishing this alligator in the bathtub, and the alligator has grown, and it's loose, and it's still angry. And Republicans are vying with one another, you know, to be the last one eaten, to borrow a phrase from Winston Churchill. But you are seeing this, the tribalism, what's happening to evangelical Christians, and the notion that does character actually matter anymore? This is how old I am. I remember when conservatives thought that character mattered, when Republicans made an issue of this. But I'm going to wrap up on this to say one last thing. We are more polarized than ever. If we had a Venn diagram of the left and the right, there's not a lot of overlap. But the part that there is an overlap, that small sliver, is intensely important. And what is that overlap? Decency, truth, constitutional limits, the rule of law, all of those things, I think, are absolutely crucial. And that's the dialogue that I think that we urgently have to have if we are willing to break out of our own bubbles. Thank you very, very much.
We're going to take questions now. Line up here. I'm going to become the bad guy because I'm going to just, please, we only have about 20 minutes for questions. Get to a question. No speeches. Right? All right. So please be respectful. A lot of people want to ask questions, so go ahead.
Thank you. I never thought I'd be admiring our conservative talk host. And the show Indivisible on
Yes.
NPR.
Yes.
How can we get it back? It was fantastic, and I sent emails. I just don't know how to make it happen.
You're referring to the show that we did out of WNYC, broadcast on public radio stations across the country. We had hosts from across the political spectrum, and it was an extraordinarily interesting experience for me in the first 100 days of the Trump administration. But I will say that my very first show on public radio in January of this year was I Am a Stranger in a Strange Place. You have to understand, having been a conservative talk show host, to be on an NPR station, I had a great deal of fun. But I do think that the folks at public radio are looking at ways of continuing that dialogue, and I continue to work with those folks, and it will take a different form. But you know, those kinds of conversations are actually so rare, but they're so valuable. Yes.
I think we've devolved into a red state, blue state society. And so my question is, how is the Electoral College fair? Most people in the world look at our elections as being unfair because they don't understand the system. And I guess I'm not sure I understand why we have an Electoral College and what the reason we continue to have it. I mean, wouldn't it be better if our candidates went to all the states and not just the states that they think they can win or the borderline close states?
Yeah, that would be. Let me answer your question this way, is that you said we become a red state, blue state, you know, divided country. It's way worse than that. I mean, it is fundamentally worse. I mean, we are becoming two separate societies. It's obvious what's happening on social media, and we'll get to this point in a moment, that we actually live in completely different worlds. When I was still doing my conservative talk show, I really got a sense of that. You know, in the morning, I was in the conservative bubble or trying to break out of it. You know, in the evening doing MSNBC, which, by the way, the left has its own bubbles as well. But increasingly, it's not just on the states. We are sorting ourselves out geographically. There was a book called The Big Sort written back in the 1990s, has tracked the way we are actually now choosing to live in places that, based on lifestyle, based on politics. So this division is getting worse. It's actually manifesting itself physically, and you can see it in the maps, not just the state map. Look at the county maps of what's happening to the country. So frankly, any of the policy answers, including changing the Electoral College, or even redistricting, not saying these are not legitimate arguments, but they don't go to the heart of the division that we're having right now, that we are tribalizing ourselves. That is the fundamental issue. In a lot of ways, I think the other physical dimension of that is really just an outcropping.
Thank you.
And my advice to Democrats is just next time win the Electoral College. I mean, it's, I'm sorry. I was in Wisconsin, and I don't know. It would have been nice if Hillary would have come once. We have cheese and beer and stuff, and sometimes you have to show up. It's just yes.
How can we get out from under this? I'm active with my local ACLU chapter and my Broward County Democratic Party, and we're always looking for ways to get people in and educate, but usually we're preaching to the choir. How can we get out from under this?
Well, I used to address this question of preaching to the choir. You know why we preach to the choir? So that they will sing. But you do need, and this is one of the things that I think is happening on the right. And I will often, I'm not going to try to dodge your answer, but I honestly right now, the problems of the left and the Democrats, I put that in the box that I call not my problem. It's your problem. But in order to understand the Trump campaign and to understand Republican politics right now is they have stopped talking to people outside of their tribe. They are, almost everything that they are doing is throwing red meat to their base. And you see that obviously in the congressional votes where everything is being done on the narrowest of partisan majorities. You see the president unwilling to break with his base in any way, which by the way explains why he is not rescinding his endorsement of an accused pedophile running in Alabama. So this may be an opportunity if in fact Trump conservatives have stopped talking to moderates and independents and people across the aisle. This is an opportunity, but and again, I don't. Why should and Democrats listen to any of my advice? Don't scare the crap out of us. I mean, part of it is understand that there are a lot of voters who want the Democrats not to force them to vote for Donald Trump, and I understand how offensive that is for some people. But in this binary world, that was the essential dynamic at the end. That no matter how awful Donald Trump was, remember he was elected with like a 60% disapproval rating, and yet he was running against somebody who was regarded as even worse. Whether that's true or not, this is part of the thinking in American politics. Who's going to talk to people outside the bubble?
So you think we should reach out to those Republicans?
I would think so, yes. And I think that, the Virginia election, I think, was an indication. You had a moderate centrist Democrat, I'm going to get criticized for that as well, but who did not frighten those swing voters. And if the Democrat can win in Alabama, it will be for the same reason.
Okay, thank you.
No. Yeah. If you were running Bernie Sanders in Alabama, forget about it. I mean,
Hi, thanks for your integrity. I watch MSNBC, but even when Trump was rising up, of course, there was so much attention paid to him, and he seemed intentionally to say things precisely because he knew that everybody in the world would cover it because they were so outrageous.
Right.
So my question is, to say more about if you would, about the entertainment. I mean, our politics have become about entertaining and the social media implication. I mean, 50 years ago, before the rise of social media, would Trump have had would he have gotten off the ground? So can you say something about the media impacts?
Those points are outstanding. There's a relationship between culture and politics, obviously, that I think was dramatically on display. I know of virtually no one in political journalism who had watched The Apprentice. So they didn't understand how powerful reality TV was as a non-political event. So yes, our politics has become about entertainment. The social media has changed the flow of information dramatically, but also the way we interact with politics. Here's the more fundamental thing, and by the way, a terrible, terrible failure of the media in giving so much free airtime to Donald Trump. I think historians in the media will go back and say, what were you thinking that you put him on unedited? And you see the charts of how much more attention he got than any other Republican candidate, how he sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And, the answer to that is twofold. One legitimate, perhaps, and one illegitimate. The illegitimate one, it's the most obvious, was that's what got ratings, and they chased the ratings. The other one was he was saying so many horrible things that if we just show people, they will hear this and be horrified, and there's no way that he will be able to survive. And of course, we all lived through this, right? He mocks the disabled, he insults women, he brags about sexual assault, and he still gets elected. That's not about him, that's about us. One more point about our politics. Guys like you and I, and this is not personal, we, I think, have thought of politics in terms of ideas, policies, and accomplishments, when in fact, politics is now more about attitude. It's about your identity. It is about, and it's why the entertainment quality becomes so much more important. So the people out there in the world, like Senator Marco Rubio, who's sitting in, or Hillary Clinton, who are sitting and thinking, I need to come up with detailed position papers. I need to come up with policy folks. Donald Trump is going, people don't want any of that stuff. They just want the bread and circuses. They want things that make liberals cry. They want all of this. And in fact, I think he had an insight, perhaps inadvertently, into what's happened to our politics. Yes.
Trump seems to have a solid support of about 35%. Can you imagine any tweet that he might send, or that is so outrageous, or any action that he might take that's so horrific that might cause that 35% number to decline? And part B for that, it would be, would any of those things make any difference to the Republicans in Congress that are now supporting him?
Let me answer the second part first. People keep asking, when are Republicans in Congress going to break with Trump? And the answer is when their base breaks. We look at that 35% number and say he's very unpopular. They look at the 80% approval rating among conservatives and among Republicans, and they say, I can't risk it because I'm more concerned about losing in a primary than in a general election. So that will, you will see political consequences downstream. By the way, you didn't ask about this, but I thought it was an extraordinary moment when a former president of the United States, George Bush, former Republican nominee John McCain, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Corker, and Senator Jeff Flake, within a period of about a week, gave speeches calling out the dangers to our democratic norms represented by this president. It was an amazing moment. It was also amazing because they were speaking for a lot of other Republicans who have been reluctant to speak. But you'll notice how few other Republicans joined them publicly. And everyone I just mentioned is basically out of electoral politics. Right. So there is that dynamic. In answer to your first question, what will it take for the Trump base to break? I'll let you know when it happens. Because we have seen him almost impervious to any of it. Do not assume that base will bolt with him even after the Russia investigation becomes more toxic. By the way, I haven't even mentioned that. Again, I am so old. I remember when conservative Republicans actually thought that a Russian attempt to subvert our democracy would be a big deal, and that we should be concerned about that sort of thing. This is why I'm so out of step. I'm sorry.
Last year's book fair was about 2 weeks after the election. Enough time for the shock to have worn off a little.
No.
I spoke to an author at a signing table and said, I understood now how about the rise of Nazi Germany. And he told me that was ridiculous, things would never get that bad. What are your feelings?
Well, I can't remember what the term is, that anytime the first person to invoke Hitler or Nazis loses the argument. However, I will tell you that throughout 2016, I said frequently to people that I was close to, which became a smaller and smaller group, that I understood the dynamics of the 1930s a lot better, including the way that intelligent, rational, decent people convinced themselves to support something because the other side was worse. I understand that. I mean, I understand now why, remember, so-and-so made at least he made the trains run on time. Well, our version is, well, at least he cut taxes, so we're willing to put up with everything. This is, I'm not going to the Nazi thing here, but I will say this. There's nothing preordained about our democracy and our democratic norms. These do not exist, because we've been guaranteed them. We're not entitled to them, and we have to fight for them. I mean, it was Ronald Reagan who said we're always one generation away of losing our freedom, and I think maybe that's kind of the shock, and maybe just because we are human beings, we don't appreciate something until we're threatened with the loss of it. Maybe we now understand these things and feel more passionately. I feel that way. I mean, I feel more passionately about the country and how important it is now than I did even 10 years ago. I mean, we may have been waving the flag, but now we really feel that it's at risk.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. So this morning I woke up to an article in the Washington Post with the headline, "In Defending Roy Moore, Alabama's GOP reflects state's tradition of defiance." Now, although his Democratic challenger is edging him out in the polls, he still has a very sizable contingency of supporters. So in light of this, I just wanted to ask, do you think that the Republican base still views itself as the party of decency and family values in the age of Trump? And if so, how does it justify this?
Well, you should invite Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham to answer that question, because they would have more insight into it. Again, when I use words like soul-crushing and disillusioning, it is, okay, do you remember when we were the party, we talked about decency and family values? How do you reconcile that? And again, part of this is if you understand, again, that our politics is tribal, us versus them. And if you convince, for example, evangelical Christians that you are under attack, you are under siege, they are coming for you, what you have is you have people who basically retreat within the fortress, and they won't listen to the arguments, and they will rally around and defend their guy who is being taken down. It's a very, very powerful phenomenon, the politics of paranoia, helped by the alternative reality bubble. But as I said before, I could write a whole book now on not just how the right lost its mind, but how the evangelical Christian right lost its mind, because that's what's really on display here. And I say that with no disrespect to Christianity. In fact, my concern is that those leaders who are rationalizing Roy Moore are doing more damage to to Christianity and to religion in general than any atheist author has ever done, than any secularist has done. And this is a real moment of choosing. This is a real moment of choosing for them as well. But if you want to just look at the kind of phenomenon we're talking about, everything's binary, everything's tribal, everything's black and white, everything is us versus them. And then at a certain point you go, wow, I've given up everything that I claimed I cared about because, I have adopted this morally relativistic win at all costs mentality, which is shocking and stunning to see it even though we knew it was there.
Great answer. Thank you very much.
Hi, just one sentence and then a question. The sentence is, years ago, Warren Beatty was in a movie where he ran for president, and he was very different than anyone else because he spoke as he saw fit and didn't do, and I think people are so tired of hearing politicians just speak, not answer questions that are asked of them, but speak in gobbledygook, that some of those may have gone over to Trump. That's one thing. The question I have is, for me, the moment that I realized that the Republican Party had gone astray was when I read that top Republican leaders met on Inauguration Day to decide to oppose everything that Barack Obama was for. And I want to know if that has happened before and we just didn't know about it, or did it happen because he was an African American or because he was a Democrat?
I can't comment on whether that meeting actually took place. I mean, obviously, we went into complete oppositional politics where rather than try to compromise. And larger question is, when did compromise become a really dirty idea? I mean, a dirty word, and I felt that happening over the last decade. And we're really reaping the impact of that right now. There's, no question about it. Now, in terms of people supporting Trump because they were tired of same old politicians who talk gobbledygook, I would recommend, if you have some time you never want to get back, read a transcript of any interview of Donald Trump. This is the part where people would always say, I said, well, he tells it like it is. Like, what is? What
But when they asked him who here would vote for the Republican candidate, no matter who it was, he was the only one who said no.
Yeah.
And of course, the others didn't vote for him, but they would never say it.
Well, there was a novelty candidate aspect to all of this that I think a lot of people played around with it and toyed around with it, thinking this will never actually happen, right? This would never actually, it's like, playing around with fire and then you burn down the whole forest and then you burn down the whole city, that sort of thing. But I find among the most extraordinary things is number one, people say he tells it like it is. The bar is set pretty high in terms of politicians who are liars. We have a lot of liars out there. Nobody is in his league. I mean, in terms of just how often he says things that are demonstrably untrue, how indifferent to the truth he is, how he weaponizes false information, and yet he tells it like it is, really. Not to mention the utter and complete incoherence of the man's thought pattern, which never ceases to amaze. I mean, that is actually the one thing that really depresses me is if you read anything that he says and you go, okay, how does anyone listen to this and not think, oh, we are really in trouble? Yes.
As a physician with 45 years experience in delivering patient care, I know that we need to have every United States citizen covered with comprehensive and yet economical health care. Now, as a conscientious Republican who is not beholden, conscientious conservative, I'm sorry, who is not beholden to any of the special interests which have gotten rich out of exploiting the American people, how would a conscientious Republican design a program that would give every American comprehensive and economical medical care?
Well, the first thing I would say, the first rule should be, and you'll recognize this as a physician, first, do no harm. Do not break something that you don't have a good idea how you're going to fix. And I think that's one of the things that was apparent as the Republicans who'd been campaigning, we're going to repeal Obamacare for 7 years, and then they get into office and they realize, oh, we don't really know how to do this without damaging the system. And what I find extraordinary is that right now, the only strategy that Republicans seem to have is to sabotage the existing system, create as much pain and dislocation as possible, and then hope somehow that somebody else is blamed. Now, I'm always hesitant to use words like unprecedented, because there's always an historian in the room who will bring something up, but I'm not sure the last time a ruling political party or president actually set out to sabotage a government program that tens of millions of people rely upon for political advantage. It's truly an extraordinary moment. This is one of those things. I don't know that you're ever going to get any Republicans, including moderate Republicans, to buy into, for example, single-payer health care.
I'm talking about that.
I know. I'm saying that they're not. But there has to be, sometime in the distant future when this fever breaks, some sort of a system that looks at this problem and says, okay, rather than imposing some sort of an abstract dogma on the medical system, what is the program that's going to make sure that every sick child is able to get the best kind of medical care? That's not left-wing, that's not right-wing. The Jimmy Kimmel test, when he was roundly mocked by conservatives, I did not think that was that unreasonable, that no American should be denied health care. How we structure it, what the incentives are, I think there are people who can probably design that, but I'm afraid that it's going to get into basically this binary choice, government controls everything, or we destroy everything just because we can, and that's why I think people ought to be really worried about this, Because, again, and I say this as a conservative, I'm watching guys that I've known for years and asking them, do you actually know what you're doing here? I mean, have you thought through, before you break the china, what actually happens? And this whole way of governing and legislating without public hearings, without due deliberation, especially on healthcare, the stakes are so great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all the time we
Thank
have
you.
for questions. Please join me in thanking Mr.
Thank you.
Sykes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
If you wish to have your book signed, he will be in the green autograph area. If you intend to stay for the next program, please have your ticket handy for Van Jones. Thank you.